Good morning. My name is Borough Councillor Jeremy Pert, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Communities and Health at Stafford Borough Council and the Deputy Leader. Thank you for joining this morning's webinar and giving up your time to do so. This is, I think, the fifth in a series of 6 webinars that we've arranged aimed at helping people to have those knowledgeable conversations and feel able to signpost people to the right support available within Stafford Borough. And really to help people have those really valuable conversations. So this morning's series is going to talk about damp and mould. And anyone who follows what is happening in the papers will know that this is a really key issue and a really critical issue for people's health. And obviously it gets worse generally during the winter months as people close windows and particularly maybe at this moment in time when being able to turn on heating is less easy. There is the 6th webinar, which is on tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and that is aimed at really signposting through citizens' advice. But I would encourage those people who haven't seen the rest of the webinars, some really good top tips from lots of professionals from across health and housing, and some really good suggestions, and hopefully will allow all the volunteers within Warm Spaces to feel absolutely at home with being able to have some of those difficult conversations, but also be able to signpost to where support and advice is available. So the thing I should probably say is the Warm Spaces were put up with partners, including yourselves, obviously, and no one partner could have put up the Warm Spaces without all of the others working together in tandem. So I just wanted to say and do a quick shout out to Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust, who have been a key supporter and partner with us, and actually ran the last webinar with us, some really interesting stuff in their Stay Well service, and equally to the Community Foundation for Staffordshire, who's been helping ensure that the financial support that is available to Warm Spaces is able to get out there and be used in the best possible way and in the quickest way. These webinars are being recorded and that will allow anyone to watch them back at any stage. So please feel free to share the links. Please feel free to come back and watch these at any stage. Equally, please feel free to drop any of us a line separately if there's anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover, or alternatively, if there was things that we haven't been clear enough on. And given these are our experts within the borough, then please don't be shy in coming forward just to ask for any support and advice. And in particular, if there are some very specific issues, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to either arrange a Teams meeting or come out and see individuals and groups specifically rather than individuals. So these webinars are aimed at volunteers, community support workers, but also maybe the odd individual direct, albeit the latter is probably less likely. So what's going to happen this morning is I'm going to hand over very shortly to Chris Butcher from Stafford Borough Council's Health and Housing team. He is the renowned Housing Standards Officer, and he's going to talk you through some of the issues in terms of damp and mould. And then we've got Michael Amberley from Housing Plus, who's going to talk about the sort of the practical nitty-gritty stuff. And I know they both are going to focus in on some top tips. And some really good worked examples of some of the stuff that they can see and they can come across, but equally some ideas in terms of how we can help people with their health. So the final thing for me to say really this morning is grab your notebooks, settle back, and let's hand over to Chris Butcher from Stafford Borough Council's Housing Standards team.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Jeremy. So just a bit about me. I'm the lead officer for housing standards at Stafford Borough Council. I'm an environmental health officer with a specialism in housing, and I've been doing this in various guises in different local authorities for the last sort of 15 years or so. Housing standards at Stafford Borough Council means effectively any issue related to housing, irrespective of the tenure. We might operate differently in terms of whether it's enforcement or advice, but we want to hear from people whether they're owner occupiers, private rented or in social accommodation. It doesn't matter to me. We cover things range from licensing of caravan sites to disrepair in properties to house in multiple occupation, anything to do with a house in whatever its guise. If there's problems or issues, then it generally comes through to my team and we try to address it. We work extensively with landlords and agents, and as well as help owner occupiers wherever they need to. So always feel free and get in contact. We're pretty friendly. So as Jeremy's pointed out, I'm going to talk a bit about damp and mould, and talk really about why this is an issue, where this has come from, the causes that you might see, and some of the solutions that can pick things up from it. I'm really understand that as volunteers, I'm not expecting you to be trying to go in depth here. I respect the fact that the people who are going to come to some warm spaces may well be coming there because they've got concerns relating to their heating. After all, they want to come to a warm place. And that, as I'll come to explain, heating is a factor in damp and mould issues. That's really why I want to sort of start raising this and give you guys some ideas. Really, it's about saying that if you are coming across somebody who's raising heating issues and is talking about the concerns they've got about mould, this should help at least give some clues as to where to point people. That's the idea. I'm then joined by Michael Abley from Housing Plus, obviously our largest social housing provider in our borough. And is doing some great things to try and assist their tenants in terms of damp and mould issues in their homes, and can give some sort of practical examples of what landlords can do to try to address these things. So between the two of us, we'll hopefully cover some things. At the end of it, please ask questions. If there's anyone who's got any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. And I'm also will provide details of how to contact me afterwards. If you've got any questions later on, please get in contact. So what is black mold? Why is it a problem? So when we use the term black mold, really we're talking about a catch-all term to describe the fungal spores that we see that can grow and multiply on surfaces in our home. Obviously, it usually takes the form, starts off with small black dots, but left undisturbed and without tackling it, can grow and expand to cover surfaces. Sometimes it looks slightly slimy, sometimes it's dry. It doesn't have to be black, it can be darker colours, greens. It's all pretty unpleasant. And it can also get onto our soft furnishings. So in the right conditions, we can also see this mould forming on the backs of cupboards, on clothing, bedding, those sorts of things. As I said, because it's living organisms, it starts off minor and can get worse. Why is this a problem? Well, I mean, okay, we all take pride in our home. So just on the most basic sense, none of us want to live in situations where we've got the smell of mold and the appearance of it, the impact. But that's not really why we are concerned. I'm concerned as an environmental health officer and why we're concerned the borough. We're concerned because there's undoubtedly health concerns that can relate to extensive mold issues. Obviously, we have had a high profile coroner's court case tragedy in Rochdale, but this has been a problem in our housing stock in our country for a long time, partially to do with climate, partially to do with the housing that we have. And it's, there's some pretty strong evidence that mouldy conditions have an impact on our health. It can lead to respiratory problems. There's some reasonable evidence that says it can affect our immune systems. And it's most likely to affect people who are very young or older. So these are the most vulnerable people in our society. So we do want to try to address it. Why am I talking about this rather than necessarily talk about other disrepair issues? Broken plugs, damaged stairs. And it's because those things are fairly straightforward to address. Damp and mold issues are not. We routinely come across service requests from folks who have concerns about this, and trying to identify the causes, I'll explain, is quite challenging. So I'm going to talk through the various contributory factors, but just beforehand, I just wanted to give a few photos for those folks who perhaps aren't sure exactly what it might look like in practice, to give an idea. So I was going to got a few photos before I start talking some more. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm hoping that that's now become visible for everyone. So see if I can make this work. Okay, so this is the sort of characteristic you might see. You see that spotting around windows, that dark back. There's not dirt or anything else. That's the beginnings of that's mold that's formed around these surfaces around windows. This is not because the window is necessarily leaking water. There's no necessarily damage to the window. It's because I'll explain about those surfaces becoming an ideal place for mold to form. And whilst it starts off with this is across the sill, you can see the spotting that's starting up the cheeks of the sides of the windows, and that can then become worse and extend all the way around. Another example, again, this is now a lower level. Again, that spotting sometimes looks almost like a dirt or something else, and it can be wiped off, but unless the root cause is addressed, then it has a tendency to come back. Again, another sort of example. This time you've got a kind of there's a like a tide line. You can see some area which looks like it's wet. Well, actually, that's probably because water is running down the wall. I'll explain a little while. Now, last couple of photos are ones which show when it gets a bit more extreme. And this is an example of where we've now got that mold that's gone away from just being little dots to kind of really spreading. And the folks who lived here have tried their best to try and keep on top of it and wipe it down, but it's returning, it's staining, it looks terrible. And obviously, you guess from the room, that's going to be a child's room. There's some real concerns about health in here. And at a sort of worst state is where we start seeing this is a result of some water penetration that's then led to mold growth that's rampant across ceilings. And you know, these sorts of environments are really unhealthy to live in, but also, you know, so destructive to our sort of mental health and well-being. So, you know, it's not just about the physical cause of health. It's also about these are our homes. These are supposed to be our places that we want to take pride in. So, you know, these are really unpleasant things. So that's the starting point. That's where we've got to as far as the as what it sort of looks like. So let's talk about what the causes of this really might be. When I get concerns related to this, often they say that it's, you know, the concerns initially are my property's got water coming in. And most often when I investigate mold issues, it's not to do with a structural issue with water coming in from a rising damp or a roof leak. That can be the cause, but it's not usually the cause. Mold is caused because of high humidities, which are uncontrolled, leading to water condensing on wet surfaces. That's the reason. The cause, the things which link to it are more complicated. So when I visit and I come to inspect a property, I think about these things. So first of all, I think about heating, and I've done that purposefully topic first because after all, these are you folks who are helping in warm spaces, and I think that's the important thing to get there. Warm air holds more water than cold air. So if our properties get too cold, or we have very warm part of our home and then very cold parts of our home, as the air temperature changes, water that's in the atmosphere from normal living, showering, bathing, cooking, breathing, normal things, not things we all do, drying clothes, that water falls out of the air and onto surfaces. The surfaces get damp, become the ideal breeding ground for these molds which naturally occur in nature, naturally around us. They come in, they hit that surface, and it becomes an ideal breeding ground which starts that process of forming. So we want people to be able to keep their homes reasonably warm, and for that temperature, the sort of temperature gradient, the time at which it goes up and down to try and keep it as constant as possible. Now we recognise that that's not easy. It's not easy at the best of times, let alone at times with high energy prices. But that's certainly something we have to have conversations around. I'll let Anna deal with that. Linking to that, and the next thing I sort of look at would be insulation. So that would be looking at and saying, okay, is the home able to retain the heat that's being used? So that's things like, is there reasonable loft insulation? Are there unreasonable drafts or things which are absolutely dragging the temperature down? Is the construction type of things like flat roofs or other things which might not be as well insulated as others? Are there other reasons to think that the way the home is built is not able to keep that heat that's being generated in? Is it getting lost too fast? Because if it is, again, that means that we're more likely to have water hitting the surface, coming out of the air, hitting the surface, condensing, and then forming that ideal environment. Most people these days have performance certificates. EPCs often are provided when people buy and sell homes. They're also for rented properties, certainly in the private rented sector. And they give a good idea about what the energy rating, the thermal efficiency is likely to be like in the home. And the worse that is, so it ranges from a A to a G, and the worse that is, the more difficult it is to retain the heat. So that gives some sort of ideas. And whilst not necessarily subject to this conversation, those who have a very low EPC should really be investigating what things they can do to try to improve that, to try and retain the heat as much as they can. The last of the major sort of things, the things that really affect it, is ventilation. And that's because, as we've talked about, that this is to do with water condensing out of an environment onto walls. Trying to reduce the humidity level in a home is key. So if there's a new building now that's built to the building regulations, it's new and modern, it will be built with extractor fans in kitchens and bathrooms. Now, building regulations don't apply to existing stock. We have many properties in our borough where that's not the case. Now, that's not to say that they all have mould issues, but you can see that part of this is that as time's moved on, we've recognised that ventilation is important, and not just the ability to open windows, but also being able to taking active steps in order to reduce the amount of water in the atmosphere. And that means things like using trickle vents. It means using extractor fans. It means getting up in the morning and open windows on both sides of a property to have a bit of cross ventilation to reduce the amount of humidity in the air. Now, that's very easy for me to say. And I recognise that for folks who are struggling with energy prices and struggling to heat their homes, when somebody says you need to open your windows, it sounds ridiculous because it sounds like I'm telling people to be cold. And the tricky thing is, and the balance that we're all having is about how do we both ensure that people have thermal comfort, ensure that their homes are able to do the normal things that they want to do, dry clothes, feel warm, have showers, all those normal things, but also ensuring that the environment works to prevent mould from continuing to form and to multiply. So part of our conversations is around the idea that warm air, wet air, damp air costs more to heat than dry air, because you're also having to heat the water that's present in the atmosphere. So by venting and by keeping that moisture level down as much as possible, it will actually cost less to feel thermally comfortable. But I accept that that's sometimes quite difficult to explain and also quite difficult to action. The last main element that comes across is the sort of disrepair elements. And these are things that are happening to a home which are causing more water to kind of fall into the atmosphere. And that's things like, pipe leaks, water leaks, it's roofing problems, it's overflowing gutters, and it is things like rising damp. But oddly, if you have a rising damp problem, when I see it, it's almost always not got mould attached to it, because the way that occurs, water comes through the wall or up the wall, and it draws with it salts from the brickwork, the masonry, and that stops the mold from forming. So what you tend to have is I tend to see rising damp in one room, and then I see mold in another room from where that water has come up into the house and then hitting surfaces where it's colder elsewhere. So part of my job when I go into a property is that sadly the damp doesn't tell me where it's coming from. And instead, my job is to try to look at all the things that are going on. I try to talk with people about how they use heating, how they use their ventilation, their normal ways of working, how many showers they're having, how they're drying clothes, all the normal things that people use in their homes. And then try and look at what is the best solutions to help these individuals. So from your perspective as volunteers, I'm not expecting you to try to identify solutions per se, but understanding these are complex, understanding that it is about heating and ensuring that there is heating on, understanding that it is about trying to reduce the humidity. So using fans in bathrooms and kitchens, keeping the door closed in the bathroom, drying clothes on a rack in the bathroom to try and, with the window open or the extractor fan on, to try and reduce the humidity. All these things are viable and good ideas to try to get it better. But in all honesty, the most important thing is to understand that if somebody comes concerned about damp mold, your question should really be, so do you own your home or do you rent it? Because if it's the latter and it's rented, then a follow-up question is, well, okay, is it with a housing association or is it privately rented? If it's with a housing association, our strong advice is just ask them to contact their housing association. It doesn't matter which one it is. They all genuinely want to address this problem. They will have facilities in place and services to try to solve this. In private rented, obviously it depends on the landlord and the agent, but nobody wants damp mold issues that can destroy properties or damage surfaces that need remedial action. So, you know, first of all, go back to the agent or the landlord and explain what the problem is. And if they don't feel like they're getting anywhere, if they've got real concerns, contact us and we'll do that legwork and we'll make the contact and we'll try and find the solutions to it. And if they're owner occupiers, send them our way as well. Maybe we could try and look at what's going on in terms of heating. Maybe we can offer some advice. Maybe we can go and visit and try and give some advice on steps that can help improve things. So, you know, the critical thing I want to get to is get people to get in contact or put them towards the people who can. Don't ignore it, because unless we come up with methods in order to reduce that humidity and make it better, that mold issue will continue. Now, last I just want to talk about things to do to try and remove mold. People come to us all the time about what can I do to get rid of it. Some people advocate using bleaches on molds, and absolutely that does kill mold spores, but it's bleach, and bleach is reasonably hazardous, and if you get it on your carpet and get it on surfaces, you'll get annoyed. So there are some really good mold sprays out there that are proprietary, that they won't remove the staining, they'll kill the mold. So there has to be a next step to try to then, sometimes it's redecoration, sometimes it's then cleansing to try and get rid of it if it's only minor. In bathrooms, using bathroom paints and things are easier to then remove it, but in other rooms it's more difficult. What we don't want to do is to brush dry mold that's on surfaces. Those mold spores are then going to go into other places, and ultimately we don't want to breathe them in. So anything that we do in terms of removing mold has to be done wet. And the World Health Organization recommends warm, soapy water, gently removing, and then using a towel to dry the surface. I've seen various ways of doing it. The problem is that sounds great when they are flat, easy surfaces to get to. When the mold is on our things, that is actually quite difficult. Or if they're on backs of cupboards, yes, you can use mold sprays, you can try and deal with that. When it is in clothing, on mattresses and other soft furnishings, I'm afraid I haven't come up with a very good solution to that. Clothing might be able to be cleansed, but affected mattresses, I'm afraid, need to be disposed of and replaced, because those molds can be very difficult to remove, and then can multiply back again. We need to try and get ourselves down to a low level. So that's me talking broadly about some of the causes. What I want to ask Michael now to do is to pick up in terms of the response to how a local authority, how a housing association works with their stock, to give some sort of practical ideas. So that's okay. Over to you, Michael.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. I'll share my screen there just so I've got a little bit of a presentation we can go through. I'll turn my camera off to do that. And hopefully that's presenting now full screen. Yes. So damp and mould is a hot topic at the moment. The point of this presentation is going to show you what we do as a housing association, how we respond to a damp and mould inquiry, what we're going to do moving forward, and hopefully it's a proactive approach which reduces the issue in the future. So I'll tell you a little about us as a company first. So we're Housing Plus Group. We're a leading provider of quality, affordable homes and care services. We've got approximately 19,000 homes across Staffordshire and Shropshire. We employ about 1,000 employees. And we've got lots of different things that we can use to help our customers, from the money invoice team and employment support, as well as investment in neighbourhoods, cleaning communal areas and whatnot. A little bit of a background onto damp and mould. So we're currently experiencing a massive calling increase in damp and mould, and there's a few reasons for that, to be honest. That we've got the first one, which is very obvious. It's the time of year. This is when the winter is when we get a lot of damp and mould inquiries anyway. But then we've also got a few more things this year in particular which are bringing damp and mould to the forefront. One of which is the Housing Ombudsman insight into damp and mould. The point of that document was to say that some housing associations use a damp and mould leaflet and send it to the tenant and basically say it's your lifestyle, it's the way you're living. Our feedback has proved that's not the case. There's many other reasons for damp and mould in properties, and lifestyle is not one of them. So we are 100% behind the Housing Ombudsman in that respect. As we've alluded to earlier in the presentation, there's a massive amount of media around damp and mould at the moment, and I'm sure we've all seen something in the news recently around damp and mould. And then we've got fuel poverty, which is affecting quite a few of our residents at the moment. So we had a resident a few weeks back during the cold spell that their digital thermometer was reading 9 degrees inside their property. They clearly couldn't afford to put the heating on to heat it. So we made a referral to our money advice team, who managed to get them some extra funding to allow them to adequately heat their home. So that's the background to damp and mould and what we're experiencing as a housing association at the moment. So I'll give you a brief description of where we used to, and this ties into the Housing Ombudsman's lifestyle report. Historically, a tenant would call into our contact centre and say, I've got an issue with damp and mould. Our go-to thing then was to issue a guidance leaflet on damp and mould and how to deal with the condensation that's in your property. And that's alluding to basically saying it's your fault, you deal with it. And then we'd ask the tenant to call back in if after following the advice, they didn't do that. It was not a great way of doing things, to be honest. And 9 times out of 10, a tenant to really receive a leaflet through the post wouldn't read it and wouldn't pay no attention to the guidance on there anyway. So I'm glad that was historic. We're nowhere near that now. Where we are now is, as a housing association, tenant calls into our contact centre and reports damp and mould. We've got a 100% inspection rate for all damp and mould inquiries. Every damp and mould inquiry coming through to our contact centre receives an inspection by a qualified surveyor. The aim of this is for a holistic approach to be taken, and Chris alluded to this earlier, that yes, there could be an issue with ventilation or heating, but actually it could also be penetrating damp. It could be coming in from an external source, leaking gutters, blocked drains, various other reasons for getting mould within a property. As an initiative that we're rolling out this year, from May this year, we're going to start calling back our tenants who've reported damp and mould within our properties. So they've gone through the process, that have had the inspection, the repairs have been completed, and from May this year, we'll call them back to say, in the winter, you had an issue with damp and mould. Is it still there? Have we resolved it? Do we need to come out and do another inspection to make sure it's been resolved? That's just proactively tackling damp and mould. Another area that we're doing at the moment is we're doing toolbox talks with everyone in the business. So everyone who steps foot into one of our properties will know how to deal with damp and mould when they come across it. So if we have a gas engineer who pops in once a year to do the annual gas safety check, if he sees damp and mould, he'll know how to refer that through to the inspection team and generate their inspection, so we're not missing these touch points. If I put that into perspective for you, on average we carry out 3 repairs per property per annum, and we also do the gas and electrical checks. So we've got a potential of 76,000 touch points where we'll be in that property, eyes on, seeing if there's any damp and mould. So it's a really proactive way that we deal with it now. Moving forward is even more exciting for me, because we're actually going into technology now and trying to be preempting damp and mould. And what we mean by that is we're going to be using data loggers installed into the smoke alarm system, and it will monitor temperature and humidity within properties. And we can see if the humidity starts to spike, that's the perfect breeding ground for damp and mould. And that will give us the opportunity to get into that tenant and say, we've noticed your humidity is rising steadily and there's a potential for damp and mould growth. Can we come out and do an inspection?
You've suddenly disappeared. Are you there?
Oh, yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We missed probably the last 30 seconds.
Oh dear. Okay, technology.
I'll be honest, I didn't. I heard everything.
Okay. Ah. Okay.
Just a point.
I'll carry on then. Potentially it's just 1 or 2 we've got issues with. So we're going to carry out an in-depth analysis of damp and mould to review property archetypes. So all the information that we're gathering through this winter period, in the summer, we're going to look at that data and try and target areas which are known to be damp and mould hotspots, should we say. And that could be the non-traditional structures where we've got concrete frame structures, and also stuff around the 40s, 50s and 60s where what we've done historically, these buildings would have had open fireplaces, timber windows that have had lots of adventitious air, which is constantly ventilating the property. What we've done as a landlord is then put double glazed units in, sealed up the fireplaces. In effect, we've made them airtight, which is great for drafts. There's not many drafts, but what we've done then is sort of done away with that adventitious air, which was giving us great ventilation. And what that means is we're going to need to install additional ventilation in the form of fans and positive input ventilation systems. These create the ventilation that we were talking about to lower the relative humidity in properties. The lower the humidity we can get, the less likelihood of damp and mould occurring through condensation, at least anyway. Another thing that we're doing moving forward is we'll have a dedicated response team. Their sole focus will be following the inspector's visit, who's identified defects or a damp and mould scenario that we need to wash it down. They'll jump in very quick and treat the mould, so we do away with the hazard initially. And that's their dedicated role. That's all they will do, is respond to health and safety issues in our properties. On the back end of that, we've also got an investment programme where we're pulling funding from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And what that means is we're externally insulating a lot of our older properties or non-traditional construction properties. This jumps onto heat loss, where we're keeping the properties warm. So we're reducing heat loss. So yeah, from my point of view, it's exciting times. I think we're definitely moving in the right way, and we are very proactive in our actions at the moment. If for any reason we have a tenant who's struggling for an inspection, we've got a really robust complaints process, and a lot of our tenants use that quite a lot at the moment if they're struggling to get answers for various things. And it always gets to the end point where I would say 95% of the time we deal with these at stage 1, and then there's a few that progress to stage 2, but they're always investigated at every stage. So yeah, I am very confident with our approach. And that's it from me. Back over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. Really useful, both presentations. So thank you very much. I forgot to mention for those people watching live that if you've got any questions, if you put them in the chat box, we can take those as we go. But I just wanted to just reflect on a couple of things. First of all, I thought it was just great advice in terms of recognising and trying to deal with damp and mould, because sometimes it's very easy to feel that it's something that you're doing, and I think that's a good recognition that actually there are some structural things, and equally some other things that just happen naturally, but equally that it's an important issue that needs resolving. But can I just ask you a question? How often are you seeing damp and mould? Is this something you see every day of the week?
Okay, so
absolutely.
Yeah, I would say it's right up there in terms of the kind of most emotive complaints and concerns that we receive. The most urgent ones we receive are, my heating is broken, it is winter, right? So that's the number one that we get in winter months that really, we need to respond to. But number two is our damp and mold issues, because they are destructive, emotive, and more challenging to address. As I'm hoping I've given the impression of, they're not easy. And so even reasonable landlords who actually want the best can easily read a little bit online and get the wrong impression, or try to suggest things like, as Michael was explaining earlier, the response of, it's your fault, it's a condensation issue, it's a tenant fault, as opposed to, no, this is a really complicated issue. Let's really get under the skin of it and try and work out what the solution is, so that we can move forward with a healthy property. So they are certainly the most complicated ones we tend to deal with. I think that's probably a shorter way of saying that response.
And that just raises, and Chris, that just raises a couple of questions in my mind.
Yeah.
The first question is, you hint at something there, which is, and this is really sort of aimed at, private landlords. You hint that you like working with private landlords rather than trying to use, penalty frameworks and other bits and pieces. Is that really the case, or is this sort of, the council wanting just to get everything?
Oh, yeah. Do less work. Yes, no, absolutely right. And I'll explain why. And it does come back down to understanding that this is a complicated issue. If I lift a little bit on the regulation side of things, the regulation of damp and mould issues isn't brilliant, and it's being looked at by central government to try to change some of the things there. Certainly weaker than perhaps if we had situations with no heating. But I don't want to focus on that, because fundamentally, if I felt that an action needs to be taken, I'm going to take legal action, because we would. But because it's complicated, and because the normal people who rent properties, and even agents who do this a lot, it is difficult. And the answers aren't necessarily a single solution. It's not a magic bullet. It's not simply put in an extractor fan. It's really working with all parties. That by working closely with landlords about what is expected, I tend to find, as an example, I work with an agent who understands that if there's a damp mold issue and they haven't got extractor fans, I'm going to require it. So doesn't need to come to me. They just need to go and put the extractor fans in, and then monitor their usage and talk about it. So, and then direct the tenants to us if they want the confirmation, if they want us to come and help them, that's fine. But so working with landlords and agents gets more work done and improves more properties than if I am taking individual enforcement action, which takes time. So there's many more properties that I don't hear about, but get improved because I've got a close working relationship.
Brilliant. That's really clear, Chris. Thank you for that clarity. Just final one for you, and then I'm going to hit a few at Michael if I can, and then I'll take some in the chat. So Chris, you talked about some of the reasons for damp and mould, but actually there's millions, not millions. There's lots of reasons, which could be, for example, leaking gutters outside, leaking onto a wall. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, Jeremy. And that's part of the holistic approach that my inspectors take when they look at damp and mould. It's not just looking at that bathroom ceiling and say, yeah, that's due to condensation. There could be something else. There could be no insulation above that bathroom, which is then creating that cold spot, which is perfect for mould to grow. So yeah, it's a holistic approach. We need to make sure we're taking everything while we're there, and that includes gutters, roofs, as well as insulation and whatnot.
That's brilliant. And when you've got 6,000 homes in Stafford Borough, 6,500 homes in Stafford Borough, taking that approach, I think, is a really responsible and useful one. And it sounds like you're working towards this sort of together with tenants rather than anything else. Now, the other point I just wanted to pick up, Michael, 76,000 touch points. That was a huge number. And I guess, does that give everyone the opportunity to raise any concern that they've got at any stage?
Absolutely. So that's based on the 3 repairs per property per annum. So we've got 19,000 houses plus the annual gas service or the electrical service. What we're doing on these toolbox talks is educating our operatives, our neighbourhood officers, anyone who goes, any employee from Housing Plus Group who goes into one of our properties to have that conversation with the tenant. Have you got any other issues? Is there any outstanding repairs? Have you got damp and mould? They're then aware of how to report that back to my team to do that inspection. So moving forward, I would like to think we'll address all of them quite proactively and not rely on the tenant to get in touch with us, because some tenants, as we've touched on before, they're not aware that the damp and mould is prejudicial to health or it's a problem, and we go in there and see it for the first time, shocked, and the tenant's like, oh, it's been there for years. So it's this contact now, this communication, which is really key moving forward, that we get that.
Your message is, and I think Chris's message as well, is come and talk to us, because we're interested, we want to listen, we want to improve any issues that are there, and find ways of doing that. Now, let me just move on to a couple of questions that are in the chat. So I think this is a Chris Butcher one. Let's see, how effective are dehumidifiers? And if I was to invest in one, is there a best area in the house to put it?
No. Then okay, so the thing is about dehumidifiers is that they are pulling air in, which is great, and yes, it does pull the water out, takes electricity because we're literally pulling the water out, but it only drawing out the water from that area. So if you've got a water leak and you've got a wet wall that's resulted from an active leak and you're trying to dry it out, putting a dehumidifier nearby, limiting the draw from elsewhere, will help. That will draw the water out of that particular thing, and that's great. But houses are often quite large, and actually, unless we're addressing the causes of that humidity, one, you're going to run that dehumidifier all day and all night and keep pulling water out, so it won't change it. But two, it won't necessarily be drawing from the right places. So if you think about it, if most of the water production is coming from using showers or drying clothes, yeah, I guess putting a dehumidifier in the bathroom would work. But to be honest with you, an extractor fan would be much better and more efficient, and you wouldn't have to empty it, and it would just be better. It would measure how much water you were taking out, which would be interesting, but I'm not sure it would necessarily be practical. There are some things, I've seen some devices which can help folks who are drying clothes by trying to remove the water, basically covering it, and then effectively drying it into removing the water. It's like a tumble dryer, but a bit less kind of large and clunky. And I think they have some uses, but I wouldn't ever recommend them just because they're expensive, they're big, and we really want to be solving the problem rather than trying to draw water out. Michael, you agree?
100%, yeah. I think if we're having to rely on dehumidifiers, we've not quite got that balance right between adequate heating and ventilation. There's an issue somewhere if you're having to rely on a dehumidifier.
Short term, addressing a disrepair issue, yeah, okay, they have their place, but long term, they don't work that way.
Okay, thanks. Just in a similar vein, then, how do you know if the extract fans, are working, Michael?
So we've got a few options with this. We use a separate company called Envirovent. They're our ventilation specialists, if you like. So they'll go out if we suspect one of our fans are not meeting the current litres per second extraction. They can measure that with an anemometer, and it just measures the extraction through the extractor fan. So that's how we check that.
I would add a low tech method. Okay,
so toilet paper.
So okay, first of all, I would say when we talk about extractor fans, there are a few varieties, and most of ours that you see, you turn on the light, the extractor fan comes on. Sometimes you put a little cord, the extractor fan comes on. Less good, but okay. Those bit of toilet paper, at least if you put a toilet paper over the top of the extractor fan and it holds it there, you at least know that there is draw. If it immediately falls down, you've got a noise when it turns on, but nothing's actually working. There are different extractor fans which work on humidity. So you turn the light on, the fan isn't working. Well, it's because actually the humidity level isn't high enough, and that's great. So that's about monitoring it and hoping and seeing when it comes on, when it is high humidity levels. There are some very, very quiet ones these days that can sometimes suggest that they're not. They seem like they're not working, but they really are, especially if they're humidity controlled ones. But you know, the low tech solution for just to start the conversation, because if it immediately falls off, then absolutely it's not working. Also, if it's making a noise, huge amounts of noise, and it's rattling around, the chances are the fan blade is hitting the housing, and it means it's not working effectively, and it's noisy, so people are more likely to turn them off. Yes, that needs repairing.
Thank you for those. Very helpful. Now, are there any early warning signs people could look out for in their homes before damp and mould really takes root?
I'll take this one, Chris, if you want. So, from our point of view, this is where these data loggers will come in. So we'll be able to monitor this moving forward. We'll see this in real-time data that we're getting issues where damp and mould could be forming. One of the most probable causes that I see just recently, at least, is condensation around windows. You'll see windows start to get condensation on them. If that's occurring, it's a bit of a giveaway. You've got a high humidity in your property, and something's not quite right with your ventilation or your heating. So yeah, if you've got windows streaming of condensation, generally there's an issue.
And presumably off the back of that, if you move into a new property, what you need to look out for presumably is that the vents are fully working and open.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's working heating in every room. I'd say that, if you've got radiators that aren't working or rooms that aren't heated, then yeah, absolutely. We want to be able to identify that. So it's not. I think I've said enough. It's not just the ventilation, though it is a pretty significant element to it. Just on the kind of what you can do about it as well. Just little things like in my room here, I've got a little that gives me the temperature and the relative humidity. It cost about £4. And I have a few in my bag anyway when I do visits, just so that I can put them down in a room, have a chat and do a bit of a visit, and then come back and see, what it's been doing. They're very low cost, and they give an idea. If that gets above 60% for a significant period of time, that is an early warning sign that we've got the conditions which are going to cause mould to form.
Now, if I was concerned about my elderly relatives and what they were doing at home and just making sure they'd got the right level of heating, what would you call one of those, Chris? And where would you get one from?
Okay, you could type in humidity and temperature measure, thermometer, or hygrometer would be another word for it. But it was trivially easy to find on a particular well-known online purchasing site.
I mean, my word for the day, hygrometer.
Hygrometer.
I think that's what you said. I'm going to see how many times we can use that word, but what a great bit of kit just to provide some reassurance for, particularly if people are concerned about family and friends and the elderly relatives who may just be a bit more concerned than usual and start putting stuff down or off. So thank you for that. Last one I've got for today, but thanks for top tips so far because they've been really great. Michael, you talked about some of the work that Housing Plus is doing in terms of retrofitting improvements to homes as part of reducing carbon emissions and heating levels and things like that. If I was in one of your homes and thought that there was an opportunity to fit some of those retrofit some of those measures, who would they talk to? What would they do?
But get in touch with the contact centre is the first protocol, and that's for everything for our tenants. They can guide you through the correct channels and get you in touch with the right people. It's primarily based on the EPC rating, which Chris touched on earlier. So if it's got a low EPC rating, then qualifies for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Another thing is if that street qualifies for that, we'll get in touch with that tenant proactively anyway and say, we're in the area, we're going to be doing these works on your property in the coming months.
Are they invasive? Would you advise people to take them up?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, they're invasive, or absolutely take it up.
Both is the honest answer. It's it's not a massively invasive thing, but it changes the appearance of the property. Jeremy is the honest answer. So if we put the EWI on, it consists of a 100mm rock wall slab of insulation, and then it's a rendered finish over the top. So the properties do look different. They look a lot better in my opinion. They look really nice once they've got that fresh coat to render, and it does improve the thermal quality of the property as well.
And these would be, you know, sort of a lot of the non-trad build houses,
Absolutely.
no doubt. And obviously, I'm assuming that you save, as a tenant, you'd save money at the end of it, because your houses are more thermally efficient and you use less heating and you get presumably less damp and mould.
That's the idea. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So that's a win-win-win from what I can work out, and that's a good place for us to finish today. It leaves me just to say thank you for everyone who has joined us. Thank you specifically to our guest, Michael Abley from Housing Plus, for just really talking through and being the friendly face of housing, because sometimes you know, that isn't always how necessarily everyone sees that. But I think that sort of pick up the phone and talk to Michael approach, not to Michael, but the contact centre is a really good one. And Chris, always good just to get your breadth of knowledge and experience on these matters. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to you and you can have the last word.
Can I have one more plug? And it's really just to say this, hopefully it's popped up on the screen. Any more questions? This is our email address, housingstandards@Stafford, BC, Stafford Bravo Charlie, .gov.uk. You can reach us via the contact centre on 01785 619 000. We always, what happens is if you call the contact centre and they can't get through to us, they send us an email. We always get back to people. So if you have any questions, you're always welcome to come and have a chat with us. Okay, so I think that's it from me. I'm trying to now close all this and suddenly failing. Ha.
You might just want to take the screen down, Chris.
I'm trying to at the moment. I have to say.
Share. It's the sharing bit. I think if you stop sharing.
2 seconds.
Anyway, I think we've come naturally to the
yes,
end of where we are.
exactly.
So I'm going to say thank you to our presenters and wish you a good day, what's left of it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.